How can you spot a lemon when searching for property, whether it's a home or an investment? In today's episode of the Brisbane Property Podcast, we're going to be discussing red flags to watch for when buying property here in Brisbane.
Welcome to the Brisbane Property Podcast with your hosts Melinda and Scott Jennison.
Hi again, everyone, and welcome to another episode of the Brisbane Property Podcast with Scott and Melinda Jennison. Spotting a lemon.
A really good topic to dive into today because, of course, nobody wants to waste money or spend money on something that becomes a bit of a money pit. So we're going to discuss, ways you can identify whether a property might be a lemon up front to avoid the distress of going through the consequences of bad decisions.
And the biggest thing when it comes to, I look at investing in property is it's a very costly thing to do. It can make or break what you're doing, especially if it's your first one you're setting out. Doesn't matter if it's your first, your second, your third, whatever it is. You want to make sure it's a good investment and it's not going to just cost you money and you put your hand in your pocket.
Can I also just say, and I'm going to add to that, it doesn't matter whether it's an investment or a home. As an owner-occupier, this equally applies. You do not want to be buying a lemon because it will become a financial burden. And, of course, every asset that you buy, whether it is a home or specifically an investment property, it does become part of your overall wealth building strategy because the majority of wealth here in Australia actually sits in the family home. So let's not exclude that owner-occupied home here in the discussions today.
Yeah, and little things that you want to, look, if you look at some things that we've seen out there and out and about, and some people might say that they've had a roof leak, for example. I've seen some purchases of properties that are apparently development sites, and yet the road, it slopes, the land slopes away from the road to the property. You can't get the water off the site. So there's little mistakes, well, big mistakes, I should say, with things like that. So there's no development potential on a site like that. They're the sort of things you got to make sure that you avoid when you're purchasing.
Yeah, and I think also, properties that might have huge renovation costs associated with rectifying defects or rectifying problems that might be identified. It's really important to understand what those costs are. Of course, we know construction costs have escalated so rapidly since post-COVID, and, we as investors or owner-occupiers want to understand how much extra cash we're going to need to rectify issues associated with maintenance, and that's something to be really aware of. And when we're talking about lemons, property lemons, we're talking about, poor assets, those non-performing investments or those homes or investment properties that just become a financial burden because of those ongoing maintenance costs. So that's what we're talking about when we're talking about buying a lemon.
Because in the last episode that we did, we talked about location a lot. So we talked a lot about location because if you get the right location, okay, you've ticked that box, you're moving into then the type of property you're selecting. And this is when we talk about, I'll look at a lot of things here, being a licensed builder, and we look at things like maintenance, preventative maintenance, and the things that can cost you money. Now, in Brisbane, we do have a lot of asbestos and we do have termites. Okay, now that's okay, providing you actually know what you're dealing with, how you deal with it, how you prevent it, and how you can actually overcome those types of things when you're looking at property as well.
I know there was some news in January that I read about a person who had purchased a property in a south side suburb here in Brisbane, and that property had an overland flow path through the site. And the intent for that property owner was to subdivide that land, but council knocked back that application. Now, of course, developers that are in the game every day of the week know that there's a number of sites, especially in relation to overland flow, that you just cannot subdivide because of the council rules and regulations. And the precedent that this particular property owner purchased the property on the basis of was that others in the street had done the same thing. Now, of course, you can't use the fact that others in the street have done a particular thing to a property as the only reason why you think that you can do the same with your property. It's so important to understand your property and the impacts on your particular site, whether it's an owner-occupied site or an investment site or a development site. It's all relative to what's happening on your site, because even things like renovations, extensions, it can impact what you can and cannot do depending on what impacts sit on your site alone. So it's why it's critical to identify any issues upfront before you buy, so that you know long term what those implications might be.
So when we're inspecting a property, some red flags, and some things common things or things you can look out for when you're inspecting property. Look at the maintenance on the property. I mean, my initial thing, which I always say to people, is your first impression. Okay, so from the outside, what does it look like? Is the property well maintained? How does it look? Your first opinion of what it looks like. Okay, as you go through the property, you look for maintenance types of things. Okay, is there water ponding in areas? Is there a bit of mold? Safety is incredibly important. So you want to make sure that there's no broken decking and all those types of things as you start to look at the property. So maintenance, safety, and health things. Mold. Mold's something that people should be aware of. You can smell it, you can see mold, but there's a few things there that you've got to be aware of when you start to look at property.
Also, if you are a property investor or you're purchasing an investment property, it's absolutely critical now here in Queensland that you're purchasing a property that's compliant with minimum housing standards, because there are standards that are now in place before you can rent a property. Because if you're buying something that doesn't meet those minimum standards, you will have to pay upfront the additional costs to ensure that that property meets those minimum housing standards. So that's going to include things like ensuring there are operational window coverings on every window in a habitable area. That's a significant cost to an investor if those things are not already in place. We also need to see windows and doors that are on ground level, all with operable locks, so that you have a secure place for tenants to live. So these things are really important for property investors to understand before you buy, because you don't want to buy something that's going to cost you a significant amount upfront to rent out, because if you don't have the cash to put into those additional maintenance costs, it can really, set you up for failure upfront.
And then I was going to say little things, sometimes big things that a lot of people don't understand is when you start to look at the structure of a house. Cracks, for example, when we look at concrete, concrete's a natural product. It will probably crack more than likely, but depending on how it's cracked, how bad it is, how wide it is the movement up and down, sideways in walls, things like that. So understanding and knowing what that looks like. Water damage, water damage from whether it's from ceiling roof leaks or even in your wet areas, your kitchens, your bathrooms, your laundries, all those types of things. Understanding what's involved in it, and then also poor workmanship. Looking at for example, a deck that's been built on the back of a property, has it been built right? Does it look okay structurally wise? And has it got the approvals, which we'll jump into a little bit later as well. So understanding the property itself and having a really thorough look around. Are the downpipes connected? All those types of things. You're talking about moisture and water around the property as well.
Especially with the amount of rain we've had here in southeast Queensland over this summer period. Keeping in mind that a building and pest inspection, especially one that is completed independently by a licensed building and pest inspector who's certified through the Queensland Building and Construction Commission, QBCC, it's going to cover off on a lot of this, and this is going to be a big important part of the due diligence, and a professional building and pest inspection, in our opinion, is essential. You shouldn't be buying a property without one unless you're about to knock that property down or significantly renovate that property, in which case you'd still want to understand that it's structurally sound before you buy. So, we see a lot of buyers removing clauses to make offers more competitive, but that can potentially expose them to significant risk. We've certainly, in our experience of purchasing properties and protecting clients with building and pest inspections, seen a number of properties over the years that have had really hidden issues that even through a visual inspection by Scott, who's a licensed builder, you can't pick these things up at a standard inspection. There's certain things that you cannot access, you cannot do at a standard inspection when you're walking through a home. For example, you can't access the roof and ceiling space. Now, I recall a low-set brick and tile home, Scott, that we purchased for a property investor, and that building and pest inspection revealed that the roof trusses had been completely eaten out by white ants. There was zero evidence of white ant activity at the standard inspection, and in fact, the house itself at the ground level was completely, intact. And it was only in that roof cavity space that white ant damage was detected. And this was in a cavity brick veneer, low set brick and tile home. So these are the sorts of things that a building and pest inspection will uncover, that will obviously enable you to make an informed decision as to whether to proceed with the purchase and either negotiate with the seller on the cost to rectify or reduce the purchase price based on the cost to rectify, or alternatively, if the scope feels too overwhelming or you can't reach agreement, you have the protection to withdraw from the contract.
They're smart little critters, those termites.
They are.
They don't like, I can give a lot of information and tips on this. They don't like light. They like moist, dark areas. So you're not going to see them running up the walls on the outside. They do like to get up the top and eat their way down because they don't want the house to fall on top of them. You can spot them in trees. So you can look at some trees on the outside of properties. And if there's dead branches right up top, there's some indications that they could be in the area. Okay, not saying that the house is no good, because you can actually do preventative things to avoid them coming into the house. So lots of tips and things like that to look for. Gardens against properties, all those types of things. There's lots and lots of tips to be able to look for when we start to look at property for our clients as well. Whether you're an owner occupier or whether you're an investor, these are the things we look at. Building and pest inspections. Now, look, I think they're absolutely critical. Sometimes they're supplied by the seller. I actually think it's a really good thing when a seller does supply it, because they're being proactive. Very different types of inspections. Sometimes you can get some really detailed ones with photos, and they talk about the photo and what they find along the way. Sometimes you can get some really basic ones. Okay, just be very careful of those, because you want to make sure you get the details. I like inspections with photos as well, where they can actually explain a lot in there.
Be mindful of the fact that if supplied a building and pest report from a seller or their building and pest inspector, you can ring that building and pest inspector directly and ask whether they would assign that report over to your name. There may be a cost associated with that, but if you are the successful purchaser, having the ability to own that report enables you to have legal recourse in case anything was missed in that report, in the future. So again, that's just a little tip for buyers. If you are relying on a building and pest report that's being supplied by others, you can make that phone call and request that assignment of ownership across, which will enable you to feel a little bit more protected.
Now, just be aware as well, your building and pest inspectors are licensed builders. Okay, licensed inspectors for building. They're not plumbing inspectors. They're not electrical inspectors. They're not air conditioning. They're not roofing inspectors. You'll probably find, and don't be sort of completely scared by it, they will probably tag their reports to say that they're not a licensed electrician, for example, and we'd recommend you get an electrician to inspect the property. Okay, that's just to let you be aware that they're not licensed in that actual field itself.
I think that Scott, you're very experienced, obviously, in construction and building, having been in that industry for a few decades. When we inspect properties, we often see rushed or cheap renovations, a lick of paint to present a property for sale. But what are some telltale signs that buyers should be wary of when inspecting a property to identify these cheap sort of, I guess, makeovers that properties often present themselves with?
I think there's some really important things, little things like timber in touch with the ground, because that's where the termites or moisture can get in there. Okay, that can actually cause a lot of problem. Cheap materials. So when we look at the cheaper, like your pine timbers as opposed to a hardwood and things like that, how it's finished. Just look at the joins. Look at the joins and look at the fittings and those types of things on them to see how they're finished off. A good little tip for people, and here's a free tip. If you go into a property and you open and close a door, just have a look at the gap around the door and the frame. It should be about 3 mil. Okay, 2 to 3 mil is the standard. If it's different or it varies on that, you'll notice that there could be some movement. Okay, have a look at cracks in plasterboard, ceilings, walls, the cornice, that type of thing. So movement, cracks, and those types of things, they're really important when you start to look at things. Okay, and that'll give you an understanding if there's a bit of structure movement, and look into that a lot more. But obviously the movement of the house, the doors and windows open and close freely, because that way you know that everything, it hasn't moved. You will get a little bit of movement. Okay, so just be aware in Queensland, in Brisbane especially in the hot summer months, you'll get moisture. Okay, so you'll get hot humidity that will make the timber swell a little bit. Okay, and then when it cools down, it'll probably shrink and open and close. So just be aware that there's those types of things. That's why we like that sort of 3 mil that I mentioned, because you can get a little bit of swelling, and you can then get that door catching and windows and not closing as well.
So obviously there's some physical property things to look out for that can make a property a lemon, but I believe also there's properties that are not lemons because of the property itself, but because of the location. So I guess we'll run through some location requirements or red flags that we would look out for to spot a location that could be considered a lemon.
Yeah, I think I talked about this a while ago in a podcast, and I said when people are looking at property, don't just drive in the street and have a look at that house and then drive back out the same way. Actually drive the neighborhood while you're there. Take the time. If you're investing this much money into a property, again, whether it's your home or whether it's an investment property, know the area and know the neighborhood. Okay, so when you drive in, drive out a different way. Do some of the streets and have a look at the neighbors. Don't, not the actual neighbors, but have a look at the neighborhood, I should say, and just see how they maintain their house. There's a good tip. If you see people with nice mown lawns and they're not overgrown, maybe if they've got a flag in in their yard, people love their houses and they love the neighborhood. Okay, that's a really good thing to be in an area where people take care of their homes and they've got pride in what they own.
Absolutely. I mean, we spent some time at Christmas in Tamworth. It's where Scott's family are from. And, we had our three now teenage and young adult boys with us. And we were driving through several neighbourhoods because we were moving around town doing various things, catching up with lots of family and friends. And they noticed a stark contrast as we were driving through certain neighbourhoods. There's neighbourhoods where you've got lovely homes that have manicured gardens, and you can really see that the homes are very well cared for. And yet other neighbourhoods in the same regional town have houses that are boarded up, houses and neighbourhoods where some homes are actually completely burnt out, and you've got old cars sitting in the front yards with motor parts and spare wheels lying around in the yard. And sometimes these neighbourhoods can be a stone's throw away from each other. And of course, we're not local to Tamworth. It's a New South Wales regional town, but just driving through certain areas, I say I'm not local. You used to be local. You grew up there. But just driving through some locations, there's suburbs, within regional towns, just like there's suburbs within capital cities that will be very different to other suburbs. So it's important to get an understanding of neighbourhoods, because bad neighbours or bad neighbourhoods can really impact on your enjoyment of your home or the performance of your investment.
Another thing also with neighbourhoods is future developments. Okay, so understanding what future developments are coming, local crime rates, as I said about presentation of houses and properties and what do they look like, understanding things like crime rates, future developments and what that area looks like. There's some things to really look for. And that's what I'm talking about, this knowledge of knowing the area and driving around the neighbourhood as well.
Yeah, there's search functions online that you can look up crime rates of certain areas. And in fact, you can, on the Queensland Police website, you can actually search crime indicators. You can understand crime rates in each suburb or region. You can also understand the types of crime that actually occur in some neighbourhoods versus others. So that's going to give you a snapshot view at a data level in terms of what's going on. And you can see crime rates that may have occurred in the last 12 months right down to the last 3 months. So you can see, whether the crime rates are increasing, decreasing, or whether they're staying about the same. And again, that often gives you an indication of a neighbourhood before you're even driving through that neighbourhood. And these are the things that we believe you should be investigating before you're actually buying. And these are certainly things that we would be investigating for our clients.
Another one, when we're talking about this the neighbourhood and concerns, infrastructure, things like train lines, main roads, the impact they'll have on that sort of property, the desirability to live there. So obviously future proofing when we looking for public transport, you want access to public transport. close proximity to that, or future transport corridors. They're the sort of things we will look at all the time. Access to them, but also beware of the noise, okay? Because you
absolutely.
don't want to be in a noise overlay, because that will affect either how you live or your tenants, the desirability to live in the property, pollution, and as you touched on, crime.
Yeah, crime rates can often be elevated in public transport stations. However, I will also say not only infrastructure that might already be in place, but infrastructure that is coming or planned. It's important to have an idea of where that's coming or where that's planned. I know here in Brisbane, for example, if you're not already aware of the Northwest Transport Corridor, Google that. There's a transport corridor that is in the planning phase. The land is already dedicated for this purpose, and at some stage in the future, we know that that will be a future transport corridor, either a highway or a train corridor, or a public transport corridor. Now, if you're living near that transport corridor, not only may you benefit from its future access, but if you're close enough, there may be negative impact associated with noise. So you need to be aware of that, especially if you're buying something that might be backing onto parkland right now, but it's actually earmarked as a future transport corridor. I would want to know that. I certainly wouldn't want to be buying my owner-occupier home with a nice parkland outlook that may be a future transport corridor, and I'd want to do that due diligence up front.
No, you could probably call it a lemon then if you bought in
You
something like
probably
that. So,
could, hence the reason for the podcast.
if we're looking at then a lemon on another side of things, legal and zoning issues.
Yeah.
Okay, so when we're talking about things like the risk of buying a property that it's not zoned, or it hasn't got council approval or certified approval. Obviously, there was council, and now there's private certifiers nowadays. But if it doesn't comply with that, you could be issued a notice to rectify from council.
Yeah, which
Okay.
is costly, obviously.
Yep, it's costly, it's stressful. So you can be issued with those types of things, whether it's your fence in the wrong location, a unimproved enclosure of a garage, a deck, all those types of things. They're the things you've got to be very, very careful of. There are things like title insurance as well.
Yeah, look, so if you purchase a property and you are not aware that there are unapproved structures, to protect yourself in the event council issues a notice to rectify, then you can take out title insurance, and that is a form of insurance that can protect you. And I recommend investigating that further if you don't already know about that. However, if you are aware that you've purchased something that has an unapproved structure, say there's a deck on the back and the agent has made you aware at the point of sale that the deck's not an approved structure, then there's actually no claim that you can make on title insurance. But you then take on that risk that if council have issue with that unapproved structure, that you might have to, pay to remove or pay to rectify and certify that particular structure. So it's important that you're aware of the property and whether everything that is on that lot is approved to be there, or whether it's been added at some stage in the future. I think it also applies to properties where the under store area has been built in as living space. If it's not approved to be used in a certain way, then you may not be able to advertise it in a certain way. And we've had many experiences like this when inspecting properties, and we assume we're going to inspect a 4-bedroom, 2-bathroom property. And when we get there, we realise the property's a 3-bedroom or a 2-bedroom property because the downstairs area, one, is not legal height, which we measure at every inspection, or two, it's not approved to be used in the way that it is a bedroom. I will say, just for completion and complete transparency, that not every habitable space or every bedroom needs to be 2.4 metres in height. There are exceptions where, properties might not have a 2.4 metre high ceiling space, but they are approved to be used as a bedroom. So not only is it important to measure to get actual facts, but then ask the question and seek out the approved building plans if that ceiling height comes in under 2.4 and it is an approved bedroom.
Yeah, when you come to things like that, I mean, obviously, there's the way the property is advertised. Okay. Now, you also can ask the agent about things like that, but you've got to do your research. You've got to do your own due diligence on these types of things. You can possibly, and I'll only say possibly, or might be able to get things approved or changed, but there could also be cost involved. Okay. And you're not guaranteed those types of things. So you've got to make sure you do your homework. okay, and have a look at it and really understand what you're talking about when it comes to those types of things. Flood zones, look, there's another thing that to be very wary of. Flooding, overland flow, those types of things. Huge effect on that is your insurance,
That's
okay,
right.
or your tenant's insurance. So if you're renting the property out, it's going to make that insurance side of things really tough sometimes, and that is a risk to take.
It is a risk. And also, if you're wanting to make any improvements to that property, either renovate or build in under, if it is in a flood zone or an overland flow zone, you may need council approval as opposed to just private certifier approval here in Brisbane. And again, that comes with additional cost that you need to be aware of upfront. And a lot of people may not be aware of the implications of those sorts of decisions. And so it's just important to highlight some of those additional issues that you will face over and above the risk of that flood risk itself.
A couple of quick tips for this before we do wrap things up as well. Take your time, okay? Don't just rush into it. Just because you're being told or because it's advertised, it's not set in stone, okay? You need to make sure you do your own research. If you've got people that obviously licensed builders and people local knowledge and things like that, that's fantastic. Do your research, take your time, okay? Because you don't want to buy a lemon and you don't want to make a mistake, okay?
Yeah.
Beware of maintenance, ongoing maintenance. I'm a big believer in preventative maintenance, okay? So if you do find a property that you can do preventative maintenance on, fantastic, do it. It's going to save you money down the track as well.
And I'd also say for any properties that you might be looking at or considering that fall within a body corporate scheme, it's absolutely critical to have a thorough review of those body corporate records.
Yep.
Ask for a copy of the bylaws, ask for a copy of the previous minutes from at least the last 2 annual general meetings and any extra meetings that have been called as a result of issues to be rectified. That's going to give you a much better understanding of the complex itself and any issues that might have already been discussed, and also reviewing the balance sheet and financial projections. These things a lot of buyers don't even think that they need to consider. And we know from experience in partnering with buyers that are looking to buy in body corporate schemes, they just don't understand what they don't know. And I think therefore getting advice and having professional representation to protect you as a buyer to ensure that you're not going to buy a lemon, you're not going to expose yourself to risk, enables you to feel more comfortable, have that peace of mind that you're not investing a significant sum of money into a home or an investment that ends up being a financial flop.
Yeah, I think, look, I know when you said earlier I can give a few tips on a few decades of building. It's probably more than a few. It's probably about 40 odd years of construction experience. It's hard to share all of that information with everyone. Okay, when people come and work with us at Streamline, yeah, look, we're here and I'm here there to help that on that journey and give people comfort or say no to it. I'll put this a nice way. If it smells or looks like a lemon, it's probably a lemon. So
Best
walk
to
away from it and don't invest your money into something that's going to cost you money, stress you out, and give you headaches. So hopefully that's helped. A little bit of a shorter episode, I think, but some good tips there for people. And as usual, and I normally say this every week, I let Melinda wrap things up, say goodbye. From myself, thanks very much for listening. Take care and bye for now.
Thank you once again for joining us on the Brisbane Property Podcast. We hope once again you've enjoyed this episode to help you with some tips to avoid buying a lemon, whether that's a home or an investment property to add to your portfolio. As always, we hope that you would leave us a review if you've enjoyed this episode and also share the episode with friends or family if you feel it would be of benefit to them. We look forward to speaking with you again next week. Until then, bye for now.